Welcome to another episode of Cadence Fishing TV. I'm James Robbins and today we're bream fishing on the feeder. The venue we're fishing today is Arrow Valley Lake in Redditch, and it's a venue that's really close to my heart and one that I've fished on for over 25 years. It was quite a unique fishery really back in the day, before commercials came around, because it was one of the first venues where you could actually catch carp in matches. Back in those days it was really good weights of carp, sort of 50 to 100 pounds, and the method was fishing a big waggler and firing balls of floating casters out. Anyway, since then the venue's evolved and changed and it's become a fantastic bream fishery. The peg I've selected today is peg 55, which as you can see is opposite one of the islands that are situated in the lake. And it's a great peg for that reason. The island affords great cover for the fish and it's normally a very reliable peg. It's a nice mild day, but as you can see it's really quite windy, which is actually great conditions for when you're bream fishing. It's a little bit overcast with sunny spells, so I'm really excited to see if we can catch some bream today. Well, that's a good start. I've had a small hybrid second cast and that's my first skimmer bream of the day. Beautiful fish, around about 14 ounces to a pound. Let's hope we can latch into some of the bigger bream as well. I've caught bream in the past up to £4 here, but I know some of the carp fishermen have caught much bigger fish, sort of up to £6 and £8. Well, as I mentioned, when it's windy, it often helps when you're targeting bream on lakes like this. But one disadvantage is the fact that it can be more difficult to cast. So you might be wondering why I'm casting sort of a couple of metres off the island. And I just know from experience that the bream shoals and odd carp really do hug that island. I'm not going straight next to it, I'm going to leave that for later on. But the distance I'm casting is around about 46, 47 metres out. So in this stiff crosswind, it is quite an effort to get the accuracy and keep casting to the island, but I think it's going to be worth it, because I'm sure that if I maybe only fished out 20, 30 metres, I wouldn't probably get into the fish as quick and maybe not catch as many fish during the session. Where it's allowed, and when I'm targeting skimmers and bream like this on the feeder, I always like to use a braid main line. The thin diameter really helps with achieving good distances easily, and also the fact that it's so direct really makes everything so accurate and definitely magnifies the bites, and you can understand a lot more about what's going on. So that's why I've got my rod rest sort of positioned in a way that's almost pointing at where I'm casting. Because the braid's so direct, once I cast and hit the clip, I don't want to pull the feeder away from where I'm fishing. So it's just a case of casting and then dropping the rod on the rest and not moving it. Obviously, if I had the rod round to a more like 45-degree angle, I'd risk moving the feeder maybe 1 or 2 meters away and spreading the feed out. So a couple of quick tips about casting when you're feeder fishing like this at medium to long range. Obviously, it goes without saying that I've picked a marker on that island, which is one of those posts, and I'm trying to drop it in the same spot every time. I mentioned that I've clipped up so that every time I cast, the distance is fixed and I'm dropping it in a very tight area. Although it's not a really long cast, You know, this sort of 45, 50 metre cast, particularly in a side wind like this, isn't easy. It's important to keep a smooth cast, a deliberate cast, and one where you're actually utilising the power of the blank by pushing with your top hand and pulling with your bottom hand. So it's a technique that takes a bit of practice, but once you've got it, you can achieve some really great distances and fish with great accuracy as well. You'll also notice that when I'm at the end of the cast, as the line hits the clip, I'm raising the rod to try to sort of break the feeder and slowly feather it into the water, a bit like you would with when you're casting a waggler. And that's a good thing to think about as well. Just helps everything in terms of the feeder hitting the water be a bit less of a crash into the water, and as we keep mentioning, keep everything as tight and as accurate as possible. Anyway, here's skimmer bream number 3 in as many casts, so it's just great to be back here at our valley. Another absolutely immaculate skimmer bream. You can still see that it's quite silver in colour. It hasn't gone that bronzy dark colour that they do when they get a bit bigger. And you can also see that it's got the underslung mouth, which sort of lends itself to its bottom feeding. Well, I've set 3 different feeder rods up today with 3 different rigs and style of feeder. And the feeder that I've started on today is this 30-gram rocket feeder. And rocket feeders are just perfect when you're casting medium to long range, particularly when it's windy like this. The fact that they're so aerodynamic with the lead at the front means that they cast straight and very accurately like a dart. And you'll also notice that I've taped up the cage as well. So I'm feeding a mixture of chopworm and castor, plugged with ground bait either end. I want to get the chopworm and castor down to the bottom. The cage feeder will often disperse the bait as it's falling through the water. So on this occasion, I'm trying to concentrate the fish on the bottom. So that's why I've taped it up. You'll see that I'm fishing it on a old style paternoster, with a paternoster of around about 6 to 8 inches. And the feeder attached to a snap swivel so I can change to different size feeders and different weight feeders. And it's a very simple but effective rig with a 3 to 4 foot tail. So really I'm covering my options to start with. I'm getting a feeder that's getting down to the bottom quickly, but my hook bait is getting a nice drop down as well. So maybe with time I might try a more positive feeder with a much shorter hook length and see what that does. But for the meantime, I'm happy catching small bream and skimmers on this rocket feeder setup. Chopped worm today has been critical, and what I like to do when I'm chopping it up in small quantities throughout the session is put it on top of this sieve so that the juices from the worm will drain out. My main thinking behind that is I don't want my ground bait to go stodgy when I mix it with the chopped worm. So I want the ground bait to get to the bottom and disperse quite easily. I don't want it clogging up. And then from that, I'm taking the chopped worm and putting it into another tray and mixing that with the casters. And I can vary the concentration of worm versus casters as the session progresses. A good tip about storing your casters while you're fishing. These are absolutely beautiful fresh casters from Lanes in Coventry. And rather than transfer the casters into a tub and fill it with water to cover my session for the day, a bit like the ground bait and the chopped worm, I like to just take the casters out as I'm fishing during the session. It ensures that they stay fresh, they don't go dark, but also they're not too wet. By keeping them in water, I run the same risk as the chopped worm of clogging up the ground bait in the feeder. The best hook bait today has been single or double red maggot, but dead maggots. So a good tip about how to prepare them. Obviously I like to freeze them, and I'll freeze them the night before when the maggots are in very good quality, very fresh. And rather than tying them in a bag and freezing them, I like to put them in these plastic sweet jars, so I can do 5 or 6 at once, and then when I'm fishing just take them out as needed. The big advantage of that is you don't get the burn on the maggot, on the dead maggot, like you do when you do it in a poly bag. And I actually like to keep the hook bait, the dead maggots, in water when I'm fishing. So at the start of the session I'll transfer them from the plastic tub, and that prevents them from going dark and actually starting to decompose. So as you can see, all those red maggots there, although they're dead, look fantastic in terms of the quality. Another good hook bait today, which I'd be absolutely lost without when I'm bream fishing, is floating red maggots. So on certain days, particularly when you're catching on the drop and you want to slow the fall of the bait through the water, using floating maggots I think is a real advantage. So I've always got those on my side tray. I don't know if you saw that bite then, but it just shows how sensitive and direct braid fishing is when you're on the feeder. It was a really positive bite, and one that was easy to distinguish between line bites or maybe small fish. I don't think it's a big fish, but it feels like another one of those small to medium sized skimmer bream. You'll notice that the rod's got a lovely progressive soft action, which helps cushion the lunges of the fish, particularly when you're playing them on braid like this. Well, actually, I think this is one of those lunatic hybrids. It is. So that's a roach bream hybrid. It's only around about, I don't know, 8 to 10 ounces, but they fight really well. So the hook bait that I've started on today is double dead red maggot on a size 16 hook. Obviously maggots are a bait that will catch pretty much everything that swims, and it's proving to be successful at the moment. And I've mixed up some chopped worm and casters that I'm loading the feeder with, and plugging the ground bait either end of the rocket feeder. So it's actually a very concentrated mix there of a good amount of chopped worm and casters. I like to chop the worms up as I'm going along rather than chopping it up in one big amount. As you can see, the chopped worm's still moving, it's fresh. And I think it must be much more attractive to the fish once than maybe one that's dried out. When I'm catching smaller skimmers and hybrids, it's important to really watch the tip from the moment that your feeder hits the water, because sometimes those fish will be taking the bait on the drop, and if you may be sinking the line or not concentrating on the tip, you might be missing a bite off a fish on the drop. I've had a couple of hybrids like that today already. But now the feeder's settled and the line's sinking nicely, I can just wait now for a more positive bite off a bream or a skimmer on the bottom. Well, that feels like a much better bream. It was a really positive drop back bite. And I can feel the heavy kicks of the bream as I'm playing it back in. This lake's not very deep, it's probably only about 4 or 5 foot out where I'm casting. In fact, the level's a little bit low at the moment. So you'll notice that I'm playing the fish with the rod up in the air. A downside or a negative of using a heavy rocket feeder like this is they tend to hug the bottom on the way in. So I want to keep the feeder and the fish off the bottom. You can really see how this rod's bending beautifully, very progressively, whilst I'm playing this fish on the braid. The critical times when you're starting to pull the fish up for the netting process, so it pays to be really careful, just gradually pull the fish towards the net. There we go, that's a bit better bream. Not massive, but a really chunky fish. Let's get him in the net. The way the fish are responding today is great, and you can actually see that feeder fishing like this is a very active method. I'm casting and reeling in really regular, and that's important because I'm building the swim up by constantly feeding in that way. So even if I don't get a bite or I miss a bite, I'm happy to reel in and feed and get back out again. One thing to emphasize again is once I've cast and I've hit the clip, I just want to put the rod on the rest. I don't want to move the rod in any way. I don't want to try and sink the line and maybe pull the line and the rod away from where the feeder's landed. I really want that feeder landing in a very accurate, tight spot. And I don't want to pull it away, and I don't want to pull my hook bait away from the area that I'm feeding. So this is the second rig I'm using today. And as you can see, instead of a paternoster, I'm fishing it on a very short sliding loop. And the idea behind that is it's a very positive method, and you're really looking for the fish to hook themselves. So with these small skimmers and hybrids, it can be a great rig to try out. I've actually shortened the hook length down as well to about 2 foot. And I've continued to catch some fish. I didn't catch any better sized fish. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try the method feeder, and just to see if we can catch a bigger bream or maybe even a carp. Well, there you go, that's the method feeder rig. Very simple. Got a 35 gram Cobra feeder with the internal elastic, a very short hook length, and I'm going to start off with this white dumbbell boilie, and I've also got another couple of method feeders rigged up with dead red maggot or sweet corn, so we'll give them a go and see if we can catch a better stamp fish. So I thought on the method, rather than use ground bait, I'd try some damp micro pellets just as an alternative feed. So we'll give that a go and try and catch us a better fish. I'm actually leaving the pellet hanging out from the feed because it's semi-buoyant, so it'll probably pop up a bit above the feeder. So obviously ground bait's really important when you're bream fishing on the feeder like this, and the mix I've used today is half Special G Dark, which is a fish meal flavoured ground bait that does seem to really work very well here when I'm targeting skimmers and bream. And I've mixed it with this new Pro Feeder ground bait, which is also from Bait Tech. My main reason behind that is I want to have a nice ground bait that has the correct texture, so it's not too sticky and stodgy. Special G on its own can be quite a sticky ground bait, so by adding that I'm getting a very nice mix that smells fantastic but also works very effectively. A good tip is when you mix your ground bait, don't leave it in a bowl with the full amount for the whole session. Keep it in a sealed bag like this, and then obviously take enough out to fish during the day in different batches. Means that the ground bait stays nice and fresh, the smell's fantastic, and it's also got the great consistency that you started with when you mixed it. Well, I think we'll make this the last fish. It's been a really great session catching these skimmers and hybrids. I've caught on all three different styles of feeder fishing today, but by far the best has been this paternoster. There we go. Another lovely hybrid. It's been great getting back to one of my favourite venues, Arrow Valley Lakes. Well, there we go. What a lovely net of fish. Let's get them back. I hope the tips that we've shown you today here, bream fishing at Arrow Valley Lake, have been useful. Thanks for watching. To find out more details about the Cadence products used during this video, check out the link below.